The first plasma lance tore through the civilian transport without warning, splitting the vessel's hull like paper and sending 300 souls into the void before anyone could scream. Commander Sarachan watched from the bridge of the UHSF Indomitable as the debris field expanded in silent horror, her knuckles white against the tactical display. 23 seconds. That was how long it had taken for the Kethran Empire to shatter 15 years of fragile peace. The giant warship emerged from the asteroid field like a predator from tall grass, its obsidian hull drinking in the light of the distant star. It was massive beyond comprehension, dwarfing even humanity's newest dreadnoughts by a factor of 10. The Kethrans called it the World Breaker, and intelligence reports suggested it had earned that name a dozen times over on worlds that no longer answered subspace communications. Sarah had seen the classified footage, had watched entire colonies turn to glass under its bombardment. She had never imagined she would face it with only a heavy cruiser and a skeleton crew still recovering from their last deployment. "All hands to battle stations," she said, her voice steady despite the ice flooding her veins. "Helm, evasive pattern Delta 7. Weapons, charge all capacitors and prepare firing solutions on that monster." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting the tactical display's crimson glow. "And somebody get me a priority channel to Fleet Command. They need to know the Kethrans just declared war." Her executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, was already moving before she finished speaking. He had served with her for 6 years, through the Proxima incident and the long patrol beyond the frontier zones, and he knew her well enough to read the calculation behind her calm exterior. "Captain, we can't fight that thing. We should jump to FTL while we still have the chance." Sarah understood the logic. The Indomitable was a fine ship, one of humanity's newest heavy cruisers, but it was built for patrol and interdiction, not slugfest warfare with a dreadnought that outmassed it 50 to 1. Running was the smart play, the safe play, the play that would keep her crew alive to fight another day. But there were 17 other civilian vessels in this system, transports and mining ships and colony shuttles filled with families who had believed the promises of safety in the frontier territories. If she ran, they would die. All of them. "Plot an intercept course," she ordered instead. "Full military power." The bridge fell silent for 3 heartbeats. Then the crew moved with practiced efficiency, hands flying across holographic interfaces as the Indomitable pivoted on attitude thrusters and accelerated toward the World Breaker. Sarah could feel the deck vibrating beneath her boots as the fusion drives pushed toward Redline, could see the fear and determination warring on every face around her. They trusted her. They believed she had a plan that would let them survive the next hour. She hoped they were right. "Captain, incoming transmission," Communications Officer Lieutenant Park announced, his fingers dancing across his console. "It's from the World Breaker. They're hailing us." On screen. The view screen shimmered and resolved into an image that made several bridge officers gasp. The Kethran commander was tall and powerfully built, her scales shifting through patterns of violet and deep crimson that Sarah's cultural database identified as aggressive dominance displays. But it was her eyes that commanded attention, golden and slitted like a predator's, burning with an intelligence that was utterly alien and terrifyingly familiar at the same time. "Human vessel," the Kethran said, her translator rendering the harsh syllables into crisp Terran standard. "I am War Matron Selketh of the Eternal Dominion. You are proceeding on an attack vector toward my flagship. This is foolish. Reverse course immediately and you will be permitted to flee with your life." Sarah rose from her command chair, squaring her shoulders. "War Matron Selketh, I am Commander Sarachan of the United Human Space Forces. You just murdered 300 civilians in a vessel clearly marked as non-combatant and operating in neutral space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for war crimes investigation, or I will consider your actions a declaration of war against all of humanity." For a moment, Selketh simply stared, her head cocking to one side in a gesture that might have been curiosity or amusement. Then she laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. You are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, Commander Chen. One ship against the world breaker? Your vessel is a minnow threatening a leviathan. But I admire courage, even when it is wasted. Her expression hardened. This system now belongs to the Eternal Dominion. All human vessels will leave immediately or be destroyed. There will be no investigation, no surrender, no mercy. This is your only warning. Then I guess we're done talking, Sarah said, and cut the transmission. Marcus was at her side immediately, his voice low and urgent. Captain, please tell me you have something resembling a plan. Sarah pulled up the tactical display between them, her fingers manipulating the holographic representation of the battle space. The world breaker is enormous, which means it's slow. Its main weapons have incredible range and power, but they need time to track and fire. We're faster, more maneuverable. If we can get inside their engagement envelope, get close enough that their heavy lances can't track us effectively. We'll be inside their point defense network, Marcus finished. They'll shred us with pulse cannons. Maybe. Sarah zoomed in on the sensor data they had collected during the brief exchange. But look at the power distribution. That plasma lance they fired at the transport drew enormous energy. Their fusion cores are running hot just maintaining shield integrity on something that massive. I don't think they can operate all systems at maximum efficiency simultaneously. Marcus studied the data, his tactical mind racing through the possibilities. So if we can force them to choose between shields and weapons, between point defense and main batteries. Understanding dawned in his eyes. It's still suicide, Captain. Probably, Sarah admitted. But it's the kind of suicide that might just save 18,000 civilians and show the Catherines that humanity doesn't back down from bullies. She raised her voice to address the bridge crew. I won't lie to you. What I'm about to ask you to do is dangerous beyond anything we've trained for. Any crew member who wishes to evacuate to the civilian vessels has 60 seconds to reach the shuttle bay. I will hold no one's departure against them, and I will personally sign commendations for your service to this point. No one moved. Sarah felt something fierce and proud swell in her chest. 60 seconds, she repeated. Lieutenant Park spoke first, not looking up from his console. With respect, Captain, if you think I'm going to miss humanity's first real warship duel with the Catherines, you severely underestimate how much I hate my ex-wife's lawyer. This is a way better story for my grandkids. Nervous laughter rippled across the bridge. Others began to speak up, offering their own reasons for staying, ranging from the noble to the absurd. But they all stayed. Every single one. Then let's make this count, Sarah said quietly. Weapons. I want every missile we have configured for electronic warfare. Maximum jamming, maximum confusion. I want that ship's sensors so scrambled they can't tell us from a cosmic ray. Engineering, redirect power from non-essential systems to engines and shields. Life support to minimum, artificial gravity to 0.3, and tell Chief Martinez I need every last joule she can squeeze from those reactors. The responses came back crisp and professional, fear channeled into focus. The indomitable streaked across the void toward the world breaker, its fusion drive burning bright enough to be seen from the outer planets. Sarah watched the range counter spin downward, 300,000 kilometers, 200,000, 150. The enemy dreadnought was turning to bring its main batteries to bear, but it was indeed slow, ponderous as a moon trying to track a bullet. Firing solutions locked, Weapons Officer Chen reported. Wait, Captain, I'm reading multiple power spikes across the world breaker's hull. They're charging weapons. A lot of weapons. How many? All of them. The world breaker opened up with everything it had. The void lit up with plasma lances and particle beams, with missile trails and electromagnetic pulses that made the indomitable sensors scream in protest. Sarah's earlier analysis had been wrong. The Catherines could fire all their weapons simultaneously, and they were doing exactly that, filling the space between the two ships with enough destructive energy to vaporize a small moon. Evasive! Sarah shouted, gripping her armrests as the ship twisted through space. Launch countermeasures in chaff, now! the Indomitable danced through the firestorm like a leaf in a hurricane. Explosions bloomed around them as missiles detonated against their countermeasures, as plasma lances missed by meters thanks to the helmsman's desperate maneuvers. The hull rang like a bell as glancing hits scored the shields, energy readings spiking into the red as the defensive systems struggled to bleed off the thermal load. "Shields at 60%, Marcus called out. "We won't survive another salvo like that." But Sarah was studying the tactical display with fierce intensity, watching the power distribution across the Worldbreaker's massive hull. There, a fluctuation, barely perceptible. Their shields had dipped, just for a moment, when they fired that massive broadside. She had been right about their power management issues. She had just underestimated how much raw power they could bring to bear despite those limitations. "Launch missiles, full spread," she ordered. "I want that ship's sensors blinded. Then take us in, full burn, straight down their throat." "Captain, that's..." "An order, Lieutenant." "Execute." The Indomitable's missile tubes spat their payload into the void, 24 sophisticated electronic warfare missiles that raced ahead of the cruiser, broadcasting enough electromagnetic noise to simulate an entire fleet. The Worldbreaker's point defense systems opened up, destroying the missiles one by one, but each detonation added to the chaos, creating electromagnetic shadows and phantom contacts. And in that confusion, the Indomitable accelerated to attack speed. Sarah felt the G-forces pressing her into her chair despite the inertial compensators. The Worldbreaker grew from a distant threat to a looming mountain of metal and menace that filled the view screen. She could see the individual weapon batteries now, could make out the alien script etched into armor plating that looked thick enough to shrug off nuclear weapons. They were close, so close that the enemy's main guns couldn't depress to target them, exactly as she had planned. "Weapons free," she commanded. "Hit them with everything we have. Target their shield generators and sensor arrays." The Indomitable unleashed its full arsenal at point-blank range. Railgun slugs moving at relativistic velocities punched into the Worldbreaker's shields, creating cascading failures that spread across entire sections of the massive hull. Laser batteries scored deep wounds into sensor clusters, blinding the Leviathan. Missiles crawled across the surface looking for weak points, detonating against weapon ports and drive nacelles. For 30 glorious seconds, humanity's heavy cruiser savaged the Kethran Empire's most feared warship, and Sarah allowed herself to believe they might actually survive. Then the Worldbreaker deployed its point defense grid at zero range. The hurricane of fire that had seemed intense at a distance became apocalyptic at meters. Pulse cannon rounds tore into the Indomitable's hull, chewing through armor that had been rated to withstand small arms fire and micrometeorite impacts. Alarms shrieked across every system as compartments depressurized and power conduits ruptured. "Shields collapsed," Marcus reported, his voice tight. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. We've lost the starboard missile battery and fusion reactor 2 is scrammed." Sarah tasted blood where she had bitten her lip. They had hurt the Worldbreaker. The tactical display showed significant damage to its sensor arrays and shield generators, but not enough. Not nearly enough. The Indomitable was dying, and they were still strapped to the Tiger's back with nowhere to run. "Captain, I'm picking up new contacts," Lieutenant Parks suddenly announced, his voice rising with something that might have been hope. "Multiple ships emerging from FTL at the system's edge. Transponders identify them as human. But I don't recognize these ship classes." Sarah pulled up the sensor data, her heart hammering. 8 contacts, each massive, each radiating power signatures that made even the Worldbreaker look conventional. They were unlike any human ships she had seen before, sleeker, more aggressive, covered in weapon systems that her database couldn't identify. And they were accelerating toward the battle at speeds that should have liquefied their crews. A new transmission cut across all channels, the voice crisp and carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. "Attention Kethran vessel, this is Admiral Richard Jean of the Terran Defense Initiative Fleet. You are in violation of 17 interstellar treaties and are hereby ordered to stand down immediately." "The Terran Defense Initiative?" Marcus muttered. "I've never heard of them." Neither had Sarah. According to everything she knew, these ships shouldn't exist. But they did, and they were moving to intercept the world breaker with clear hostile intent. War Matron Selkatha's voice crackled across the comms, addressing the newcomers with undisguised contempt. More human minnows. The Eternal Dominion does not recognize your authority. Depart or be destroyed along with your foolish kindred. Admiral Zhang's response was almost cheerful. See, that's where you've made a critical error in judgment, War Matron. You've encountered humanity's outer colonies, our explorers and traders, our second-line defense forces. Capable people, certainly, but not equipped for full-scale warfare. There was a pause that seemed to crackle with menace. You haven't met Earth's actual military. Let me correct that oversight. The 8 unknown ships opened fire simultaneously, and Sarah's understanding of warfare fundamentally changed. The weapons were like nothing she had encountered in her 15 years of service. Beams of coherent energy that punched through the worldbreaker's shields like they weren't there. Missiles that maneuvered with impossible agility, avoiding point defense fire and detonating with yields that registered as tactical nuclear weapons. And something else, something her sensors couldn't quite classify, that seemed to reach out and twist the very fabric of space around the Kethran dreadnought. The Worldbreaker, the ship that had destroyed colonies and shattered fleets, reeled under the assault. Its shields flared and failed. Its armor, meters thick and forged in exotic foundries, cracked and burned. And for the first time, Sarah saw the massive vessel attempt to flee, its engines flaring as it tried to build up the velocity needed to jump to faster-than-light speeds. Negative, War Matron, Admiral Zhang said calmly. You wanted to see what happens when humanity gets serious about war. You don't get to leave before the lesson is complete. Weapons, deploy the gravity anchors. 4 of the unknown ships fired devices that attached to the Worldbreaker's hull and began emitting a field that Sarah's sensors interpreted as localized spatial distortion. The Kethran vessel's engines screamed, pouring energy into its FTL drives, but it remained locked in normal space, pinned like an insect to a mounting board. Indomitable, this is Jean. What's your status, Commander? Sarah found her voice, though it took effort. Significant damage, Admiral. We have casualties and multiple hull breaches, but we're intact. Mostly. Good flying, Commander. Hell of a thing you did, going after that monster with a cruiser. Your crew just bought those civilian ships the time they needed to reach FTL. We'll take it from here. Fall back to a safe distance and start recovery operations. There was a note of respect in his voice that warmed Sarah despite everything. Earth has been watching the frontier colonies, Commander Chen. We've been watching and preparing. The Kethrans made a mistake when they fired on civilians. We're going to make sure they understand exactly how big a mistake that was. Sarah wanted to ask 1,000 questions about where these ships had come from, how Earth had developed such advanced technology in secret, why they had waited until now to reveal themselves. But her ship was wounded and her crew needed her attention. The questions could wait. All hands, begin damage control procedures, she ordered. Medical teams to the breach zones. Engineering, I need a status report on our FTL capabilities within the hour. She paused, looking at the view screen where the Worldbreaker was being systematically dismantled by weapons humanity supposedly didn't possess. And somebody start composing a very detailed after-action report. I have a feeling this is going to be one for the history books. As the Indomitable limped away from the battle, Sarah caught one last glimpse of War Matron Selkatha's face on the view screen before the Kethran cut the transmission. The alien's expression was no longer contemptuous or amused. It was something Sarah recognized from her own mirror on bad days, the look of someone who had just realized they had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The Kethran Empire had fired first, had shattered the peace with violence and arrogance, expecting humanity to flee or fold. Instead, they had awakened something they didn't understand. And now, Sarah suspected, they were about to learn a lesson that humanity had learned long ago in its own blood-soaked history. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never assume silence means surrender. And never, ever fire the first shot unless you're absolutely certain you can finish the war. The Catherines had started this war with a massacre. Watching the Worldbreaker's shields fail under the relentless assault from the Terran Defense Initiative fleet, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that humanity would finish it. The medical bay of the UHSF Indomitable smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, a familiar scent that Sarah had experienced too many times in her career. 17 crew members injured, 3 critical, none dead. Given what they had faced, those numbers felt like a miracle. She moved between the beds, offering words of encouragement to her people, making sure each one knew their sacrifice had mattered. "Captain on deck," someone called weakly, and she waved them down. "As you were. You've all earned your rest." She stopped beside Engineering Chief Martinez, whose left arm was wrapped in regenerative bandaging. "How bad?" Martinez grinned through obvious pain. "I've had worse hangovers, Captain. Doc says I'll be back to full duty in 3 days." Her expression sobered. "We lost Reactor 2 completely. Starboard side is a mess of compromised systems. But we're alive, and that bucket of bolts is still flying. I call that a win." "The best kind," Sarah agreed, squeezing the chief's good shoulder before moving on. She was on her way back to the bridge when Lieutenant Park's voice crackled through her comm. "Captain, Admiral Zhang is requesting permission to come aboard. He's already at our main airlock." Sarah paused mid-stride. Earth's mysterious fleet commander wanted to meet in person, and apparently didn't believe in waiting for formal clearance. That told her something about the man, confident, used to getting his way, and probably testing her response to unauthorized boarding. She smiled slightly. "Two could play that game. Inform the Admiral that I'll meet him in Conference Room 2 in 10 minutes. And Park? Make sure he takes the long route from the airlock. Give him a good look at what fighting the Worldbreaker cost us." "Understood, Captain." Park out. Sarah detoured to her quarters long enough to change into a fresh uniform, her current one was torn and blood-stained, and to check the tactical updates. The Worldbreaker had been disabled, its weapons offline and its crew facing the choice between surrender or continued destruction. The civilian vessels had all escaped to FTL. And the Terran Defense Initiative fleet was holding position around the Indomitable like protective wolves around an injured pack member. The questions were piling up faster than she could process them. Where had these advanced ships come from? How long had Earth been developing this technology? Why had the outer colonies been left to fend for themselves with inferior equipment? And most pressingly, what did this mean for the war that had just begun? She entered Conference Room 2 to find Admiral Richard Zhang already waiting, standing with his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the star chart displayed on the wall. He was tall and lean, perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of posture that suggested military academy training drilled into muscle memory. When he turned to face her, she was struck by his eyes, sharp and assessing, the eyes of someone who made decisions that affected billions and slept soundly afterward. "Commander Chen," he said, offering his hand. "I apologize for the informal arrival. Old habits from my days running black operations. We tended to show up where we weren't expected." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip. "Admiral, I appreciate the dramatic rescue, but I have questions that need answers before we proceed further." "Direct." "I like that." Jean gestured to the chairs around the conference table. "Please, sit. I imagine you've been on your feet since the shooting started." She remained standing. "With respect, Admiral, my crew just fought and bled against a dreadnought that outmassed us 50-1, using equipment that's apparently obsolete compared to what Earth has been hiding. Before I sit down for a friendly chat, I need to understand why we were out here with second-rate technology while you had weapons that can crack that monster like an egg." Zhang's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. "Fair question. The answer is complicated and involves 40 years of secret development, careful political maneuvering, and some difficult choices about resource allocation. But the short version is this: we didn't know if we could trust the frontier colonies to keep secrets." Sarah felt anger spike hot in her chest. "So you left us vulnerable. We left you looking vulnerable, Jean corrected. There's a difference. Every frontier colony, every outer settlement, has been operating under the protective umbrella of deep space monitoring networks that would make your tactical sensors look like children's toys. We've been watching the Kethran Empire for 15 years, tracking their expansion, analyzing their technology, and waiting for them to reveal their true intentions. He paused. Today they did exactly that. And now we respond with overwhelming force. You used us as bait, Sarah said quietly, the realization settling over her like cold water. No, Commander. We used the appearance of weakness to force our enemy into revealing themselves. There's a difference, though I understand it might not feel that way from your perspective. Jean finally moved to the table, pulling up a holographic display that showed the local sector of space. The Kethran Empire has been probing our borders for years, testing our resolve, looking for weakness. Every time we deployed advanced technology, they adapted and escalated. We needed them to commit fully, to show us everything they had, before we could calibrate our response. Sarah studied the display, her tactical mind engaging despite her anger. The hologram showed Kethran fleet movements over the past decade, a slow encirclement of human space that would have gone unnoticed without the sophisticated tracking Jean described. The World Breaker. That was their trump card. One of them. We've identified at least 3 more dreadnoughts of similar class, plus conventional fleet assets that outnumber our public-facing forces 5-1. Jean highlighted several points on the map. They were planning a coordinated strike across multiple systems, a decapitation blow designed to shatter human resistance before we could mount an effective defense. But they got impatient, or perhaps their war matron was more aggressive than their command structure anticipated. Either way, they've shown their hand too early. Sarah sank into a chair, the exhaustion of the past hours suddenly catching up with her. So what happens now? Now? Jean smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Now we show the Kethran Empire what happens when you threaten humanity's children. Fleet Command has authorized the deployment of the full Terran Defense Initiative, 60 ships with technology 20 years ahead of anything the Kethrans have encountered. We're going to dismantle their forward positions, rescue any human colonies under threat, and make it abundantly clear that attacking civilian vessels results in consequences they won't forget. You're talking about total war. I'm talking about a brief, decisive war that ends with the Kethrans suing for peace on our terms. Jean leaned forward. But I need something from you, Commander Chen. I need your help selling this to the frontier colonies. When word gets out about the TDI, about the technology we've been holding back, there's going to be anger. Betrayal. People asking the same questions you just asked. I need someone they trust, someone who bled alongside them, to explain why this was necessary. Sarah met his gaze. You're asking me to lie to my people. I'm asking you to help them understand a larger strategic picture. You're a tactical officer, Commander. You understand the principle of acceptable losses, of sacrificing a piece to win the game. His voice softened slightly. And for what it's worth, I watched your engagement with the World Breaker. What you did was extraordinary. You saved 18,000 civilians with a damaged cruiser and sheer audacity. The frontier colonies need leaders like you, now more than ever. Before Sarah could respond, the ship's alert system chimed. Marcus's voice came through the comm captain, we're receiving multiple distress calls. Kethran forces are attacking human colonies across the frontier. It's not just one ship, it's a coordinated assault, at least 30 systems under attack simultaneously. Sarah was on her feet immediately, Jean beside her. Get me a tactical overlay, she ordered. The conference room's holographic display shifted, showing a map of human space now lit with red warning indicators. Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed the scope of the attack. Dozens of colonies, hundreds of thousands of civilians, all under assault. This is retaliation for the World Breaker, Zhang said grimly. They're escalating before we can deploy our full response. Brutal, but tactically sound from their perspective. How fast can your fleet respond? Sarah demanded. We can have ships at the critical systems within 6 hours. But that might be too late for some of them. Zhang was already working his own comm device, issuing rapid-fire orders. I'm mobilizing every TDI asset in range, but we're going to take casualties. Significant ones. Sarah stared at the map, her mind racing. 6 hours was an eternity in combat operations. Colonies would fall, civilians would die, and the Kethrans would gain momentum that could shift the entire strategic balance. Unless. The Frontier Defense Forces, she said suddenly. We might not have your advanced technology, but we have numbers and we know the territory. If you can share targeting data from those monitoring networks you mentioned, we can coordinate a defense until your ships arrive. Zhang looked at her with new respect. That would require giving Frontier commanders access to classified intelligence networks. Fleet Command would have my head. Fleet Command is about to face a public relations nightmare when colonies start falling and people ask where Earth's protection was, Sarah countered. Give us the tools to defend ourselves and we become partners in this war, not victims waiting to be saved. Which narrative do you prefer? For a long moment, Zhang said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. You know, Commander, I think you're wasted on a heavy cruiser. How would you feel about a promotion? Ask me again when we're not in the middle of a war, Admiral. Sarah moved toward the door. Right now, I need to get my ship combat ready and start coordinating with other Frontier forces. Are you going to give me that access or not? Zhang pulled a data chip from his uniform pocket, tossing it to her. Already loaded with everything you need. I had a feeling you'd say yes. He headed for the door, then paused. Commander? What you did today, charging the world breaker with a damaged cruiser to buy time for civilians, that's the kind of thing that wins wars. Not technology or tactics, but people willing to stand when running makes more sense. I had a good crew, Sarah said quietly. The best crews follow the best captains. Don't forget that. Zhang departed, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of responsibility and the data chip that could change everything. The next 6 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. Sarah patched the Indomitable's critical systems, redistributed her crew to cover the gaps left by casualties, and established communication with 17 other Frontier defense vessels in range of the embattled colonies. The intelligence data Zhang provided was staggering: real-time tracking of Kethran fleet movements, detailed analyses of their weapon systems, and tactical recommendations that must have come from years of secret observation. Working with the other Frontier captains, Sarah organized a rapid response force. They were outgunned, outmatched, and flying ships held together with spare parts and determination. But they knew these systems, knew the asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies that could turn a losing battle into an ambush. And most importantly, they were angry. The Kethrans had made the mistake of attacking civilians, of assuming humanity would scatter in fear. Instead, they were about to face colonists who had carved homes from hostile worlds and wouldn't surrender them without a fight. Sarah's task force arrived at the Xantha colony just as Kethran cruisers were beginning their bombardment. The colony's shields were failing, its defense platforms already reduced to debris. Another 30 minutes and the settlement would be defenseless. All ships, execute attack pattern Omega, Sarah commanded over the fleet channel. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them time to coordinate a response. The Frontier vessels swept in from multiple vectors, their weapons far less powerful than the TDI's advanced systems but wielded with desperate precision. Sarah's tactical overlay, fed by Zhang's intelligence network, showed her exactly where to strike for maximum effect. She targeted shield generators and sensor arrays, creating cascading failures that left the Kethran ships vulnerable to follow-up attacks from her allies. The battle was fierce and costly. Sarah lost 2 ships from her small fleet, good captains who died buying time for others to complete their attack runs. But when the Kethran cruisers finally broke off and retreated into FTL, Xantha colony was still intact, its people shaken but alive. Indomitable, this is Xantha Control, a voice crackled over comms, thick with emotion. You saved us. We thought we were dead for certain. That's what we're here for, Sarah replied, though exhaustion made her words heavy. Hold position and begin rescue operations for any escape pods you detect. Reinforcements are coming. True to Zhang's word, the TDI fleet began arriving at embattled colonies within 6 hours, their advanced ships turning the tide of battle wherever they appeared. The Catherine assault, which had seemed unstoppable, ground to a halt as humanity's true military might revealed itself. Within 12 hours, every attacked colony had been reinforced or evacuated, and the Catherine forces were in full retreat. Sarah watched from the Indomitable's bridge as the casualty reports came in. Thousands dead, dozens of ships destroyed, 7 colonies with significant infrastructure damage. The cost was high, but it could have been catastrophic without the coordination between frontier forces and the TDI. Captain, Admiral Zhang is requesting a video conference, Lieutenant Park announced. Sarah straightened in her chair, suddenly aware of how ragged she must look after 18 hours of continuous operations. Put him through. Zhang's face appeared on the view screen, and he looked as tired as she felt. Commander Chen. Hell of a job coordinating that defense. You saved a lot of lives today. We all did, Admiral. Those frontier captains fought like demons. They had good leadership. Zhang leaned back in his chair. Fleet Command has been watching your performance. They're impressed, and so am I. We're reorganizing the frontier defense structure, integrating it with TDI assets to create a unified command. We want you to lead the frontier sector. Sarah blinked. Admiral, I'm a cruiser commander, not a fleet admiral. You're a leader who understands both the frontier mentality and strategic coordination. That makes you uniquely qualified for this role. Zhang's expression grew serious. The war with the Catherines is just beginning. They'll sue for peace eventually, but not before they've tested our resolve several more times. We need someone in the frontier who can work with both the colonists and Earth's military establishment. Someone both sides trust. Sarah thought of her crew, of the captains she had coordinated with during the defense, of the civilians on Zan the colony who had thought they were going to die. What about the Indomitable? She'll be repaired and upgraded to TDI specifications. Consider her your flagship. Zhang smiled slightly. Though I suspect you'll be spending more time coordinating fleet actions than flying patrols before long. Before Sarah could respond, a new alert flashed across her tactical display. An incoming transmission, this one on Catherine military frequencies. She glanced at Zhang, who nodded. Let's hear what they have to say. The view screen split, showing both Zhang and the image of War Matron Selkith. The Catherine commander looked diminished somehow, her scales muted colors that Sarah's database identified as indicating submission or distress. Human commanders, Selkith said, her translator rendering the words with formal precision. I speak with the authority of the Eternal Dominion's War Council. We request negotiations for a cessation of hostilities. 12 hours ago, you were massacring civilians, Sarah said coldly. What changed? Selkith's golden eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. You changed, Commander Chen. We believed humanity was soft, divided, easy prey. We believed your frontier colonies were undefended, your military forces scattered and inferior. She gestured to something off-screen. We were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The Eternal Dominion does not continue wars it cannot win. Zhang spoke up, his voice diplomatically neutral. The Terran Defense Initiative is prepared to negotiate a peace settlement. But there will be conditions. Reparations for the civilians killed. Withdrawal from all systems within 50 light-years of human space. And full accounting of all Catherine military assets to ensure compliance with any treaty. Unacceptable, Selkith began, then stopped as Zhang simply stared at her. That is, those terms are harsh. You fired first, Sarah said quietly. You killed 300 civilians in an unprovoked attack on a clearly marked non-combatant vessel. The war matron I spoke with before the battle was arrogant, certain of her superiority. That certainty cost your empire dearly. These terms are generous compared to what you inflicted on colonies you conquered. Selkith was silent for a long moment. I underestimated you, Commander. Underestimated all humans. It is a mistake I will not repeat. She inclined her head in what might have been a bow. The Eternal Dominion will consider your terms. I will recommend acceptance to the War Council. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah and John alone on the split screen. Think they'll accept? Sarah asked. They don't have much choice. We shattered their forward fleets and crippled their most powerful dreadnought. They'll posture and negotiate for better terms, but eventually they'll sign. Jean studied her thoughtfully. So, Commander Chen. About that promotion. Are you interested? Sarah looked around her bridge, at her crew who had followed her into impossible odds and emerged victorious. She thought about the frontier colonies who needed protection, about the delicate balance between Earth and the outer settlements, about the thousands of decisions that would need to be made in the coming months. On one condition, she said finally. The frontier forces get full access to TDI technology and training. No more secrets, no more using us as bait. We're all humanity, whether we're from Earth or Proxima or Zan the colony. We stand together or we fall separately. Jean smiled. Agreed. Welcome to the Terran Defense Initiative, Admiral Chen. As the transmission ended, Sarah sat back in her command chair and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. The Kethrans had fired first, had started a war they thought they could win through shock and overwhelming force. Instead, they had discovered that humanity, fragmented and seemingly vulnerable, could unite with terrifying speed when threatened. The war would continue for months, she knew. There would be more battles, more negotiations, more difficult choices. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Kethrans had learned a lesson that dozens of species throughout history had learned before them. Humanity didn't start wars. But when provoked, when threatened, when pushed too far, humanity finished them. Decisively, completely, and with a determination that turned patience into preparation and preparation into victory. Sarah looked out at the stars, at the frontier she had sworn to protect, and smiled. The giant warship had fired first. Humanity had finished the war. And in doing so, had announced to the galaxy that Earth's children, all of them, from the oldest colonies to the newest settlements, stood together as one species, one people, one unstoppable force. Let the other species take note. Let them remember this moment when a seemingly outmatched cruiser charged a dreadnought to protect civilians, when frontier colonists and Earth's hidden fleets united to repel invasion, when humanity proved once again that underestimating them was always a fatal mistake. The message was clear, written in the debris of Kethran ships and the survival of threatened colonies. Humanity. Fuck. Yeah,